Hi, Civil War class. Going into week 9 with some big changes, as you can see. In this week, we're looking at the lowest point of the war, leading us up to the turning point, taking us towards a rising victory for the Union. So I hope everybody enjoyed their 4th of July vacation, and some of you may have gotten ahead and read this already, but for those of you who haven't looked at the chapter yet, just a brief little overview about what we're going to be looking at this week. So the chapters that you're reading this week start off with 3 attempts. The chapter's called Three Rivers in Winter. And by the end of 1862 in winter, there's this idea that if we can wrap this war up with some quick victories, then the Confederacy might surrender. So the first attempt in order to wrap up this war is after the firing of McClellan as the head of the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln puts Ambrose Burnside in charge of the Army of the Potomac. And Burnside's plan is to march south over the Rappahannock River through the city of Fredericksburg and converge on the city of Richmond. And to take the city of Richmond would be to take the capital and therefore end the war quickly. But the problem is, marching from Washington, D.C., through Manassas, down to Fredericksburg, on the way to Richmond, you have to cross a series of rivers. And the major river between Washington, D.C. and Richmond is the Rappahannock River. In order to get through the Rappahannock River, you either need to go over bridges, which are at remote points throughout the river, or create pontoons. So Ambrose Burnside is going to decide pontoons. But the problem is that until those pontoons are built, he really can't cross the river. So immediately you're going to see a problem where Burnside's army has to wait until these pontoons are built in order to cross into Fredericksburg, giving Lee an opportunity to fortify the city of Fredericksburg in the hills of Mary Heights and eventually destroy Ambrose Burnside's army. You're also going to see sort of a mixed result attack on Stones River, the city of Murfreesboro, which is going to be an attempt to really push the Union forces out of Kentucky and Tennessee, which is going to be successful at keeping them away, but it's not really going to end the war immediately. And then finally, Grant is going to attempt to take the city of Vicksburg, which is really the last major fortification on the Mississippi River. So again, those are your 3 rivers, Rappahannock, the Stones, and the Mississippi. And Grant is going to fail to attack the city of Vicksburg. It's too strategically difficult to get to, with bends in the river, with the fortifications in Jackson, Mississippi, with the armies of Pemberton and Bragg really defending the area. So the end of 1862 into 63 is going to be a big disappointment for the North, which is going to lead the South to really try to mount a large attack in the beginning of 1862 in order to quickly end the war for them and force the Union to surrender. So the middle chapter talks about, now that you have these negative aspects of the war, you're going to get a larger peace Democrat faction in the North. And these are people who want to end the war immediately by making peace with the South. And the leader of this faction is Clement Vallandigham. And Clement Vallandigham, sort of like the leader of almost like a terrorist organization, is trying to really end this war, going against everything that Lincoln stands for. And eventually, Clement Vallandigham is looked at as subversive, and he's arrested and he's deported. Meanwhile, there's a need for more soldiers. So the United States issues an Enrollment Act. And that Enrollment Act, which is really more of like a revision of the Conscription Act, is an enforced draft. And for the first time, Americans don't really have a choice. And they could pay money, they could pay $300 in order to get out of the draft, but the average middle class or poor person doesn't have that money. So this is really targeting the poor in order to have them join the war. Now, eventually, you're going to get to the middle of 1862, and there's going to be another attempt in order to stop the Confederacy. And Ambrose Burnside's failure at Fredericksburg is going to leave him high and dry, and he's going to be replaced by Fighting Joe Hooker. And Fighting Joe Hooker, famously known for the originator of the title a hooker, a prostitute, because that was the type of person he kept in his tents at night, Fighting Joe Hooker is going to have a plan to attack Lee. But the problem is he has superiority in numerical numbers of soldiers, but they're fighting in a forest. They're fighting in an area called the Wilderness, which will eventually be the name of a later battle. around the area of Chancellorsville, just north of Fredericksburg. And in an amazing feat of sort of tactical experience and advantage, Lee is able to send Jackson around and surround Hooker. And even though Hooker has far more soldiers, Hooker is defeated because he's taken by surprise by several attacks, first by Jackson and then by Lee. By the end of Chancellorsville, again, the Union is disgraced. Hooker is replaced by George Gordon Meade, excuse me. And Meade is going to be in charge of pushing Lee back towards Richmond. Except Lee has hatched a plan that he's going to invade Pennsylvania. So Lee amasses a huge army of northern Virginia, and he converges on the city of Gettysburg. So now we're leading up to, this is the final stand. It's the Army of the Potomac, the Great Army of the North, versus the Army of Northern Virginia, the Great Army of the South, on the Eastern Front. Now, I'm not going to give too much away about Gettysburg because you'll be reading about it, but obviously Gettysburg is a big win for the Union, and we're able to stop Lee's army from invading into Pennsylvania. But we can't forget the West. Grant's strategy to take the city of Vicksburg is going to end the war pretty much in the Trans-Mississippi side, or it's going to at least make the war so small in the Trans-Mississippi area that more forces can be focused on Georgia and focused on Virginia, which are really the two places that need to be taken in order to get a mass of the Confederate Army. So really, in the end, what happens is that Grant is able to seize the city of Vicksburg, which you'll read about, and Lincoln is able to get this moment where he says, this is the time to end the war. Grant is elevated to the status of hero. Meade is elevated to this epic proportion hero, except he still can't defeat Lee. Grant is able to really defeat Pemberton and end the war on the Mississippi. Meade is unable to stop Lee, and Lee is able to escape, which really ends the chapter. So this is what you're going to be looking at over the next 3 chapters. And there's another paper that's going to be due, I believe it's due in 2 weeks. So make sure you have that paper in. Paper 3 is due this week. So if you have questions, please let me know. But we're really getting to that moment in the war where the Union really has to secure victory through major defeats of the Confederacy. And Lee will have a moment of great rise towards 1864. But at this moment in time, Lincoln thinks the war is over, or Lincoln thinks the war is coming to an end, and he's very gracious for his commanding officers, Grant and Meade, for winning these 2 great wars in July of 1863.